Are you ready for week 12 of the fantasy season? Well, ready or not, here it comes. And for a lot of you, the trade deadline is past. The only way you're going to improve your team from here on out is through the waiver wire. Fortunately, in week 11, there were a lot of points scored, a lot of big performances, and a lot of new players that are worth picking up. Even better news, the injury report is so short, I bet you I can get it done in 30 seconds or less. Let's start with Darnell Mooney. He's questionable going into the week with an Achilles. He played, but then left with a hamstring injury. Something to monitor, but good news for them is that the Falcons are on bye next week, so he should be good after that. Tyjae Spears could not make it through a full game yet again, left with a concussion. We'll see what happens with him. And somehow both Raiders running backs injured in week 11. Alexander Mattison with an ankle, Zamir White with a quad injury, and I think it stands to reason that you shouldn't care about either one for fantasy right now. All right, now I got to tell you which are the players you should be looking at to pick up off the waiver wire and a few players that you can cut loose if you need to. First, a reminder that you want to get your picks in for Underdog. You still have time for Monday night's game. And if you aren't on Underdog yet, well, you get a free pick just for signing up. It's CJ Stroud, just going higher than 0.5 total yards. He gets a yard, you win that pick. It's free for new customers. You just need to sign up using code NGAME. You get not only that free pick, but also up to $1,000 worth of bonus cash. I don't usually start out with a quarterback position here, but I'm going to this time. A lot of you might need a streaming quarterback, especially with so many teams on bye in week 12. But also, we might have seen the resurgence of a guy who was one of the top quarterbacks drafted in fantasy and then dropped everywhere. Yeah, it's Anthony Richardson. We really had to just wait and see what was going to happen here. We had no idea how he would respond to this 2-game benching and then all of a sudden coming back. And it wasn't a great spot against the Jets. But he responded, and not that it was a huge statistical game for him, but he responded in terms of taking his team down late in the game, leading them to a win. And yeah, it actually was a pretty nice fantasy game because he ran for 2 touchdowns. But I think the best thing is the fact that his completion percentage was over 50%. Hey, we'll take it. 20 for 30 passing, but no interceptions. That's what you want to look for, that ball security, the fact that he was more accurate than not. I mean, look, that's never going to be his thing, right? This is not a guy who's going to just throw darts and, complete 80% of his passes. It doesn't matter. For fantasy, you want that rushing upside. That's why he was drafted high, and that's what he delivered. He's not going to score 2 rushing touchdowns every week, but he could score a rushing touchdown or 2 any given week. So whether you need a streamer or you're looking for more upside at the position or whatever it is, AR is still out there in more than half of all fantasy leagues. Invest in him for the long term. Now, as far as next week goes, it gets the Detroit Lions, which immediately sounds frightening because you saw what just happened to the Jags. Now, this is a different situation here. Obviously, the Jags are one of the worst franchises in the NFL. AR is not guaranteed to have a big game against this Lions defense, but the Lions will, to teams other than the Jaguars and Mac Jones, give up points to quarterbacks and wide receivers because a lot of times the other team just has to pass. So it may not be his best game, but I think he is at least still startable. Another dynamic athlete that was drafted high and dropped in some leagues is Xavier Worthy. I was completely out on Xavier Worthy. I said 0 chance I would start him in week 12, and I wasn't alone here. As we all didn't expect, Xavier Worthy was the star of the first half of that game with 4 catches, 61 yards, and a touchdown, and even carried the ball one time. And look, he really should have had an even bigger game except for that one play where he didn't manage to get the toe in bounds. He could have gone for even more yardage. But just the fact that he was involved at all is remarkable enough because last week only 4 targets, 1 catch. The week before, 0 catches on 2 targets. It looked like he was being phased out. But this week, they decided they were going to attack by using him in creative ways. You really hope that this continues. He's still available in some shallower leagues. In some places he was let go. So no guarantee he's out there. But if so, it might be time to pick him back up because he does at least have that weekly upside. Now for the last couple of weeks, I've been talking up Cedric Tillman. This week, a lot of you started Cedric Tillman, which made a lot of sense. We should have known it was going to be Jerry Jeudy week. So in the Browns offense, it just looks like everybody is now fantasy relevant with Jameis Winston at quarterback. Let's talk Jeudy, who was the leading receiver, one of the best fantasy receivers on the day, thanks in large part to an 89-yard touchdown. But overall, he finished with 142 yards. Again, we don't want to chase points and we don't want to, put too much stock into a guy who has one big play, but it's not just that. He had 11 targets, so he was the leading target for the Browns. And with Jameis Winston back there, yeah, this team is just going to continue to air it out, no matter who the opponent is. The Browns, one of the leaders in terms of passing rate over expectation. It's going to just continue this way. It is actually kind of aggravating the fact that you have so many receivers now that are viable in this offense, because a lot of us who started Cedric Tillman got pretty much nothing while we're watching Jeudy go off, but that's just the way it is. Look, Jeudy at the very least gives you a floor each week, and now we've seen there is definitely upside here. His point totals are going to fluctuate on a weekly basis, but hey, it is the receiver position. And as I mentioned, the Browns airing it out. 3 different Cleveland receivers were in the top 6 in total air yards as far as the early slate goes, among all wide receivers. Jerry Jeudy, Cedric Tillman, and the other one is Elijah Moore. And Elijah Moore also had himself a pretty nice game for fantasy. 6 catches, 66 yards, and a touchdown against the Saints. But again, this isn't just one game against a weak opponent. This is something that has continued to happen ever since Amari Cooper left and since Jameis Winston has taken over. Over the last 4 games, Elijah Moore has totaled 35 targets. Elijah Moore is one of those guys, since he came into the league, I was so high on and so disappointed in, because it just never happened consistently. He'd flash and then disappear, and you just never knew what to get. This might be the first actual stretch of games, more than just 2 or 3, where Elijah Moore has been consistently productive. I do have to caution, as far as both Jeudy and Elijah Moore, and also Cedric Tillman, this schedule is going to be pretty brutal for the wide receivers of Cleveland coming up. They're going to have to face Pittsburgh twice, Denver, and Kansas City over the next 4 weeks. So while all 3 are definitely worth rostering to some degree in different leagues, it's not so easy as to say, yeah, I got a Cleveland receiver, I can just start him going forward. Still not a whole lot of running backs to talk about, because somehow it looks like we're going to make it through the season with hardly any major running back injuries. Okay, so this is not injury related, but Roschon Johnson seems to be back on the radar. Notable that with Chicago in that first week with a new offensive coordinator, Thomas Brown, they were A, more run heavy, but also B, more evenly split in terms of touches. This wasn't just DeAndre Swift's backfield here. Swift was far more effective as a runner, got that long touchdown. Roschon Johnson had a very short touchdown, but he got 10 carries, Roschon Johnson did, as opposed to DeAndre Swift's 14. I mean, that's a near even split. That's not what we really thought was going to happen. And as far as that touchdown goes, this is now the 5th touchdown for Roschon Johnson this season. You know, when they get to the goal line, he's mostly the guy who's getting it. Swift will get some carries at the goal line, but it was again Roschon Johnson here, and he converts more frequently. Both Swift and Johnson have the same amount of carries inside the 5-yard line, and Johnson has cashed in 5 different times, as opposed to only twice for Swift. This is the type of running back that has more appeal in a non-PPR league, because, well, he's not much of a pass catcher. He will catch the odd pass here and there, but Swift really has that role mostly locked down. So more of a TD vulture than anything, but he's getting the carries, and he does have a little bit of juice. So if Johnson's going to be part of the game plan, which it seems like they really want to establish the run to keep Caleb Williams off his back, and it pretty much worked, I think you can expect more of the same going forward. That means Johnson will at least have some bye week appeal. And again, this week you got 6 teams off. You might need somebody who's at least getting the rock. And the best tight end pickup for this week seems too obvious. I almost hate that long touchdown for Jonnu Smith happened. I was all set to talk about him anyways, and then he went off and did that. So everybody's going to be scrambling to pick up Jonnu Smith. And hey, why wouldn't you? 2 touchdowns, over 100 yards, and 6 catches in this game. Yeah, it was the Raiders, but still, this is an offense that has really gotten Jonnu Smith involved over the weeks. In fact, if you are someone who drafted Jalen Waddle pretty high this preseason, I might advise you to look away here. Jonnu Smith has clearly been one of the top receivers, way ahead of Jalen Waddle. Now that they have an actual tight end who is a receiver first and foremost, they're using that position, and that's what's hurt Waddle the most. Over the last 6 games, Jonnu Smith has not had fewer than 3 receptions. He's averaging about 6.5 targets per game and 5 catches per game. And this extends even back to before Tua came back. But the fact is, since Tua has come back to the fold here, Jonnu Smith's involvement has persisted, and so we have to take it seriously. He is now definitely one of the top receiving tight ends out there, and if he's available and you need a tight end this week, I think you've got to prioritize him. Back to wide receiver, Like if you're looking for some help here because again, so many players are gonna take the week off. Let's look at a player like Wan'Dale Robinson, who's just coming off of his bye week. Now, I know it wasn't that long ago where we were saying Wan'Dale Robinson, the upside's not there. You don't have to hold on to him. All right, that bye's over. If you do need a wide receiver, well, I think you can scoop him back up because this week it's Tampa Bay. You already know how this goes. Tampa Bay secondary, one of the worst in the NFL, give up a ton of points to wide receivers, and it's hard to believe even after a couple of lackluster weeks, Wan'Dale Robinson still heading into this week, 5th among all wide receivers in total targets and 6th in receptions. That gets you that floor in a PPR league. Yeah, if you're talking non-PPR, I mean, you can probably just skip this. He's probably not getting you much. Only 2 touchdowns this year. But if you are in a full PPR league, you know he gets you that floor because of the receptions. He's targeted so often. And I think this week we finally might have some upside for more because of the matchup. As of right now, I can't say I'm even sure who the quarterback is going to be for the Giants, but if it's not Danny Dimes, that might be even better. And then even though it goes against a couple of my principles for fantasy, I have to talk about Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. First of all, don't like chasing points. All right, so he had that one huge play. Yeah, you probably saw the highlight, 98-yard touchdown. It happens. It doesn't mean he's going to be a fantasy asset going forward. I also hate to chase touchdowns. The main appeal here for Westbrook-Ikhine is he is scoring touchdowns. He actually has 5 touchdowns on the season. That's the same as Justin Jefferson somehow. And all those touchdowns have come just in the last 6 games. And they haven't come in bunches all in one game. No, he scored in 5 of the last 6 games. That also kind of coincides with DeAndre Hopkins leaving Tennessee. I also really don't love going after a number 2 receiver on a really bad team. But look, we just can't ignore this. If he's going to continue to make plays, be an end zone target, and score touchdowns, I mean, you have to at least consider him in fantasy. And again, with such a deep bye week here and playoffs coming up very soon, you want some upside. Scoring touchdowns gives you that. If you're in a 12-team, 10-team, or more shallow league, no, you probably shouldn't go here. But in a deep or just really competitive league, why not? Westbrook-Ikhine, let's do it. You can do without these guys. This is the cut list. It's time to make some tough decisions. If you have some waiver wire ads you need to make, let's start with Deontay Johnson. I mean, we've seen enough here, and by that I mean we haven't seen him. 2 targets, 0 catches, on the field for only 6 routes run. Sound familiar? Yeah, he's putting up the same stat line week after week, which is absolutely no involvement in this Baltimore offense. Really makes you wonder why the Ravens bothered to trade for him. Maybe they didn't get what they expected. Maybe he's not happy in Baltimore, which is really weird. I don't know. I don't care. I'm moving on here. Cut Deontay Johnson and forget it. And then I hinted at this earlier. Jalen Waddle, he had his chance. It's not happening this year. Forget it. Jonnu Smith, the tight end, has now become a receiving threat. In fact, he's become more of a target than Waddle in this offense. Jalen Waddle has just not done anything for you in fantasy. 2 catches for 37 yards against the Raiders while Jonnu Smith went ham. That means Waddle has only gone over 60 yards once the entire season, and that was in week 1 against the Jaguars, who cannot fall victim to the sunk cost fallacy. It doesn't matter what you thought of him preseason. It doesn't matter what he did last year. It doesn't matter where you drafted him. Just have to forget the name, look at the lack of production, and move on. And the same goes for teammate Raheem Mostert. Yeah, last year was definitely his career year. This year, it's totally different. And it's not even injuries that are bothering Mostert. It's just ineffectiveness. He didn't even touch the ball last week. This week somehow carried the ball 3 times for -2 yards. I mean, the only good thing you can say about Mostert is that he hasn't fumbled lately, but that's because they're not even giving him the ball anymore. Yeah, Jalen Wright is getting a little bit more involved. Raheem Mostert is just a dud. And I'd like to hold out hope for Tank Bigsby in Jacksonville, but I don't think there is any hope left in Jacksonville. So you already know Bigsby didn't play. He's hurt, okay? And then there's the bye, so he's not even going to be playing next week. And then there's the fact he's still on Jacksonville. Look, I don't care who's the coach, what's happening here. Let's just cut our losses and avoid this Jags offense, at least the running game for now. And finally, I know some people still held out hope for Dalton Kincaid, are still holding on to Dalton Kincaid, but why? Didn't play in week 11. Has the bye next week, and then after he comes back, it's San Francisco, one of the toughest traditionally against the tight end position. So there's really not a lot of reasons I can think of to hold on Kincaid, except for where you drafted him. Let's also look at his production this season. In 10 games, he's only gone over the 50-yard mark 2 times, And those two games were 51 and 52 yards. And it's not like he's helping you by scoring touchdowns. He only scored 2 touchdowns on the year. So I don't see why it would start happening for Kincaid if it hasn't by now. This time of year, you want to make sure you make the right decisions, who to pick up, who to drop, and of course, who to start and who to sit. You know we're going to have you covered as we always do. Check out the Week 12 playlist.